the tray shattered, spraying champagne across the marble like diamonds. My cheek burned from Director Song's slap, her insults echoing through the silent gala. She saw a nameless waitress. She didn't see the platinum ring hidden beneath my uniform, a gift from the only man the elite feared. The air in the Imperial Hotel's grand ballroom was thick with the scent of $500 an ounce perfume and the icy chill of absolute privilege. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, a phantom in a stiff black and white uniform, invisible to the titans of industry who sipped vintage Cristal. To them, I was merely an appliance with hands, a convenience that cleared their messes without ever uttering a word. This was my life and soul, a brilliant linguistics mind from Nairobi reduced to a ghost in a city of glass. I had learned to navigate the vertical hierarchy of this society by keeping my head down and my presence thin. I was a glitch in their perfect system, an immigrant survivalist who knew that in a place this obsessed with status, being noticed was a dangerous thing. Beneath my starched collar, the platinum ring hung on a delicate chain, resting against my heartbeat like a secret weapon. It was a cold, heavy weight that reminded me I wasn't just a waitress. I was the woman who had stitched the wounds of the shadow architect on a stained mattress in a rooftop room while the world searched for his body. Kwan Teo, a man of sharp angles and even sharper intellect, sat at the head table just 40 feet away. His presence was a gravitational force, a silent storm that kept the city's most powerful men on their best behavior. We didn't look at each other. We couldn't. In this room of wolves, our love was a target, and my invisibility was the only shield I had left. Before we dive into the fallout of this night, have you ever had to hide your true power just to survive? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for the reveal. I saw Director Song before she moved. She was the gatekeeper of this gilded world, a woman who wore her cruelty like a designer silk wrap. She hated the way I carried myself, with a poise she couldn't buy and a dignity she couldn't break. As I passed her with a fresh tray of flutes, her silk-shod foot darted out. It was a professional trip, calculated and cruel. The world tilted. The crystal exploded. The sting of her palm against my skin was the spark that would finally set this entire facade of high society ablaze. To understand the fire in Director Song's eyes, you have to understand the 6 months of silence that preceded it. Before the platinum ring and the secret meetings, my life was a relentless cycle of labor and erasure. I lived in a 5-square-meter rooftop room in a neighborhood where the streetlights hummed with a dying buzz. Every morning at 4 a.m., I was a ghost scrubbing the obsidian floors of corporate lobbies. By noon, I was weaving through traffic on a scooter delivering spicy rice cakes. I was a linguistic scholar with a master's degree, yet in soul I was merely the help. I had come from Nairobi with a heart full of ambition, but the city had tried to grind that ambition into the pavement. I was an outsider in a land that valued sameness, and my black skin was a beacon that the elite chose to ignore until they needed someone to blame for a smudge on a window. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in February, draped in a freezing fog that smelled of salt and industrial exhaust. I was taking a shortcut through the Incheon docks, my body aching from a double shift, when I saw the wreckage. A black sedan had been forced into a shipping container, the metal crumpled like paper. Standing in the center of the carnage was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble and shadows. Kwan Teo. He was leaning against the container, one hand clutched to his side, dark blood seeping through his fingers. He looked death in the face with a terrifyingly calm expression. I should have kept walking. In this city, seeing too much is a death sentence. But I saw his eyes, cold, sharp, and profoundly solitary. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life, waiting for a single moment to change your destiny? Share your story below and subscribe as we delve deeper into the shadow world. I stepped out of the darkness, my breath blooming in the cold air. If you stay here, you'll bleed out before the police ignore the call, I said. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply watched me with a gaze that felt like it was peeling back my skin to see my soul. He didn't know then that I was the woman who would save him, and I didn't know he was the man who would give me a crown. I didn't see a kingpin. I saw a man. I led him back to my tiny room, far from the hospitals where his enemies waited, and began the long process of stitching back together the most dangerous man in Seoul. For 6 days, the man who held Seoul's heartbeat in his hands lay on a threadbare mattress in my rooftop room. I watched him battle the fever, his body tensing with the muscle memory of a warrior even in sleep. I didn't know he was Kwon Tae-oh, the shadow architect. I only knew he was a man who didn't cry out when I cleaned his wounds with stinging antiseptic. In the quiet of those nights, as the neon lights of the city bled through my thin curtains, a strange bridge formed between us. He was a man used to people trembling in his presence. I was a woman used to people looking through me as if I were air. In that tiny space we were just two survivors. When he finally woke with eyes clear and focused, the air in the room changed. The authority he radiated was effortless, yet he looked at me with a curiosity that felt like a physical touch. "Why didn't you leave me?" he asked, his voice a low rasp that vibrated in the small room. I didn't give him a poetic answer. I told him the truth, that I knew what it felt like to be discarded by a city that only cared for the strong. He didn't offer me money then. He stayed another day, watching me prepare for my shift at the catering company, his eyes tracking the way I smoothed my uniform and pinned my hair. He saw the dignity I maintained in the face of poverty, and I saw the loneliness he hid behind his iron mask. When his people finally arrived, men in dark suits who bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor, he didn't just walk away. He paused at the door, looking back at my cramped, spice-scented home. "You saved a person, Zuri," he said softly. "And a person never forgets." The weeks that followed were a blur of secret arrivals. Black sedans with tinted windows waited for me after my shifts. We spent our nights in places the elite didn't know existed. Private traditional houses hidden in the hills and quiet riverbanks where the water reflected the stars. He didn't want a trophy. He wanted a confidant. He began to teach me the language of power, and in return, I reminded him of the world outside his fortress. He became obsessed with my safety, yet respected my need for independence. Have you ever found a connection so deep it felt like destiny was pulling the strings? Tell me about your meant-to-be moments below, and hit subscribe to see how this secret love leads to a public explosion. The secret romance between the shadow architect and the invisible waitress below was a collision of two worlds that should never have met. Tae-oh lived in a world of clinical precision, where every move was a calculated risk and every person had a price. I lived in a world of raw necessity, where the price of a bus ticket was a major calculation. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, we found a shared language that transcended wealth and status. He would pick me up in nondescript cars, taking me to hidden spots along the Han River where the wind whipped off the water, carrying the scent of salt and change. It was during one of these nights, under the orange glow of a waning moon, that he took the platinum ring from his pocket. It wasn't a showy diamond intended to brag. It was a solid, unbreakable band of metal that felt heavier than its size suggested. "In my world, a ring on your finger is a bullseye for my enemies," he whispered, his voice catching the chill of the night air. "But a ring near your heart is a promise. Wear it on a chain, Zuri. Let it be the secret strength that reminds you that you are never alone, even when the world refuses to see you." I accepted it, not because I wanted to be rescued, but because I saw the vulnerability in the man who controlled the city. He was terrified of losing the only person who saw him as a human being rather than a weapon. I continued to work my shifts at Lumiere Catering, the ring a cold, comforting weight against my skin. It was my private rebellion against the socialites who snapped their fingers at me. Have you ever possessed a secret so powerful it changed how you walk through the world? Drop a comment about your hidden strengths and subscribe to see the secret come to light. While we built our sanctuary, a predator was watching from the heights. Director Song, the head of the city's most prestigious cultural foundation, had been observing me. She didn't see the ring, but she saw the way I stood, too straight for a waitress, too proud for an immigrant. To her, social order was a religion, and I was a heresy. She began to request me specifically for her private events, not to reward my service, but to find the crack in my armor. She wanted to remind me that no matter how much grace I possessed, I was still the help. She was a woman who used her refinement as a blade, and she was sharpening it for the night of the gala, unaware that the shadow standing behind me was the only thing keeping her world from collapsing. The night of the philanthropic gala arrived with a chilling, predatory elegance. The ballroom of the Imperial Hotel was a masterpiece of intimidation, draped in gold leaf and illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than a Kenyan village's annual budget. I felt the weight of the evening as I tightened my bow tie in the staff locker room. For the elite, tonight was about performative kindness. For me, it was an exercise in extreme restraint. I checked the chain around my neck, feeling the cool, familiar bite of the platinum ring against my skin. Teo would be there. He would be forced to sit at the head table, playing the role of the respected businessman while surrounded by the very vipers who had tried to have him killed 6 months ago. We had agreed that tonight, above all nights, we were strangers. I stepped onto the floor, the heavy scent of lilies and expensive cologne hitting me like a wall. I was one of 20 servers, a black woman in a sea of monochrome uniforms, weaving through the titans of Seoul's industry. I saw Teo almost immediately. He looked lethal in a bespoke tuxedo, his face a mask of granite, his eyes never straying from his dinner companions. Yet, as I passed his table to refresh a water glass, I felt his energy, a low, protective vibration that made the hair on my arms stand up. He was watching me through the reflections in the silverware, his jaw tight with the silent agony of seeing me serve the people who considered me beneath them. It was a delicate dance of distance and desire, performed under the watchful eyes of the city's most dangerous men. Then I felt a different kind of gaze, cold, sharp, and dripping with malice. Director Song was positioned near the center of the room, her eyes following my every move like a hawk spotting a disturbance in the grass. She wasn't here to celebrate, she was here to dominate. She had noticed the way I stood, the way I didn't flinch when the other waitresses scurried, and it offended her sense of order. She wanted to prove that no matter how much dignity I carried, I was nothing more than a servant she could break with a single word. Have you ever felt someone's jealousy or hate before they even spoke to you? Describe that intuition in the comments, and subscribe to see how this silent war turns physical. As the main course concluded and the speeches began, the room fell into a practiced hush. I was carrying a tray of vintage cristal toward the VIP section, my movements fluid and practiced. I saw Director Song's hand twitch as I approached. It was subtle, a minor adjustment of her chair, a slight extension of her foot, but it was enough. I felt the snag against my ankle. The world seemed to slow down as the tray tilted. The crystal flutes slid, their stems snapping like dry twigs against the marble floor. A fountain of champagne erupted, drenching the director's $10,000 silk gown in a sticky golden spray. The sound of the crash was a symphony of disaster that silenced the room, and I knew, as I looked up at her reddening face, that the invisibility I had relied on for years had just been permanently shattered. The silence that followed the crash was more deafening than the sound of the breaking glass. 200 pairs of eyes, representing the peak of South Korean power and wealth, converged on me as I knelt in the wreckage. The champagne soaked into the knees of my black slacks, cold and biting. My hands were already bleeding from a jagged shard of crystal, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt the heat of Director Song's fury. She stood over me, her chest heaving, the golden liquid dripping from her silk hem like melted honey. Before I could offer a word of apology, she moved. The slap was a violent, sharp crack that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My head snapped to the side, and the world blurred into a haze of white light and stinging heat. "You filthy, clumsy animal," she hissed, her voice a low, terrifying vibration that carried to every corner of the room. "Do you have any idea what this gown cost? Your entire lineage couldn't afford a single thread of it." She raised her hand again, fueled by the intoxicating rush of public humiliation. Around us, the elite didn't move. They watched with a detached, morbid curiosity, as if witnessing a play. But then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A heavy, suffocating pressure descended, as if the oxygen had suddenly been sucked out of the hall. The sound of a single chair scraping against the marble floor rang out like a gunshot. Quan Teo was standing. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, terrifying grace of a predator that had already decided its prey was dead. The crowd parted before him instinctively, a wave of black suits and diamonds recoiling from the sheer force of his presence. His face was a mask of absolute, frozen stillness, but his eyes were burning with a fire that could have leveled the city. He stopped just inches from Director Song, his shadow swallowing her whole. The director's hand stayed frozen in mid-air, her face draining of color as she realized who had just stepped into the light. Have you ever seen a bully realize they've picked a fight with the wrong person? Tell me about that moment of justice in the comments. And subscribe for the showdown. Teo didn't look at her. He looked down at me. He reached out a hand that had signed death warrants and built empires, and gently cupped my bruised cheek. The silence in the room was so profound I could hear my own pulse. "Zuri," he whispered, his voice a low gravel that broke the spell. With a slow, deliberate movement, he reached for the chain around my neck and pulled the platinum ring into the light. The diamond-less band caught the glow of the chandeliers, blindingly bright. He didn't say a word to the crowd. He simply knelt in the champagne and broken glass beside me, claiming his queen in front of the world. The gasp that rippled through the ballroom was a collective intake of breath that sounded like a dying fire. Director Song's face transformed from a mask of arrogance to a distorted map of terror. She knew that ring. The entire elite of Seoul knew the seal of the Kwon family. It was a mark of absolute protection, a sign that the wearer was under the personal sovereignty of the shadow architect. Teo didn't rise immediately. He stayed on one knee beside me, his thumb tracing the cut on my palm where the glass had bitten deep. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the cold fury radiating from his body. When he finally stood, he didn't just stand up. He ascended. He seemed to grow taller, his shadow stretching across the marble until it touched the hem of Director Song's ruined gown. "You mentioned her lineage," Teo said, his voice terrifyingly calm, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate the very chandeliers above us. "You spoke of the price of a gown while standing in the presence of my future wife." He turned his gaze toward the director, and for the first time in my life, I saw a woman truly realize she was no longer at the top of the food chain. Director Song staggered back, her hand flying to her throat as if to protect herself from the invisible weight of his words. The room remained paralyzed. Not a single security guard moved, and not a single billionaire dared to blink. They were witnessing the public unveiling of the shadow architect's only weakness, and they were realizing that his weakness was more dangerous than his strength. Teo reached out and took the stained white cloth from a nearby table, slowly wiping the champagne from my hands. He was methodical, ignoring the hundreds of cameras hidden in the phones of the elite. "Director Song," he said, never raising his voice, "by tomorrow morning your foundation will be dissolved. Your husband's shipping contracts will be voided. And by sunset, you will be a ghost in this city." He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "You wanted to make her invisible. Now you will learn exactly what that feels like. Have you ever seen a moment where the untouchable, finally faced the consequences of their cruelty? Tell us your favorite instant karma story in the comments and subscribe for the fallout of this public war. He turned back to me, his expression softening into something so private and tender it felt like we were back in my tiny rooftop room. He reached down and unpinned the Lumiere Catering name tag from my chest, dropping it into the puddle of champagne without a second glance. "The shift is over, Zuri," he whispered. He draped his bespoke tuxedo jacket over my shoulders, the warmth of his body heat instantly chasing away the chill of the ballroom. As he led me toward the exit, the sea of elites parted like the Red Sea, their heads bowing in a synchronized display of fear and newfound respect. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the woman who had survived the shadows to claim the sun. The aftermath of the gala was not a quiet ripple. It was a seismic shift that leveled the social landscape of the city. By the next morning, the invisible waitress was the only name on everyone's lips. News outlets struggled to find photographs of me, but Teo's public declaration had been enough to turn my former life into a museum of the past. As we sat in the sanctuary of his private estate, a fortress of glass and cedar tucked into the mountains, I watched the world dismantle Director Song. Teo was a man of his word. Her foundation's assets were frozen by noon, and the shipping magnate who called her wife was already filing for divorce, terrified that his association with her would sink his fleet. In the halls of power, mercy was a foreign concept, and Teo had ensured that anyone who had ever looked down on me was now looking for a place to hide. Despite the luxury surrounding me, the transition from shadow to light was jarring. I replaced my starch-white service uniform with silks and cashmeres, but the weight of the world felt heavier. Teo remained my constant, a pillar of unyielding support who refused to let the vultures of the media pick at my history. He spent his days systematically removing every person who had participated in my marginalization, while his nights were dedicated to ensuring I felt safe in a world that had suddenly become very loud. "They will try to make you a character in their stories, Zuri," he said one evening, his eyes soft as he watched me look out over the city lights. "But remember, you are the one who held the needle that stitched me back together. You are the architect now." I realized then that I didn't want to just be a protected secret. I wanted to be a force of change. I began to use Teo's vast resources to build what the city had denied me, a bridge for those still living in the cracks. I founded a legal and advocacy center for immigrant workers, ensuring that no one else would have to be a ghost to survive. I pushed Teo to shift his influence from the shadows into legitimate, transparent sectors that benefited the very streets we had once hidden in. Have you ever turned your past pain into a platform for helping others? Share your journey of empowerment in the comments and subscribe for our final part of the story. The wedding of Zuri and Quan Teo was not the end of a fairy tale but the beginning of a new era for Seoul. We were married in a private courtyard where the ancient stone walls were draped in white jasmine, far from the prying eyes of the paparazzi and the judgment of the skyborn. I didn't wear a dress that cost as much as a house to prove my worth. I wore a gown of Kenyan lace that honored my mother, and on my finger, the platinum ring finally sat in the open air. Teo looked at me not as a prize he had won, but as the compass that had guided him out of his own darkness. As we stood before the few people we truly trusted, I realized that my journey from a ghost server to the partner of the city's most powerful man was complete. I had found my voice, and I intended to use it. With Teo's protection as my shield and his resources as my sword, the Zuri Foundation became the most formidable force for social change in the country. We didn't just provide legal aid. We dismantled the systems that allowed women like Director Song to treat human beings like disposable tools. Teo transformed, too. Under my influence, the Shadow Architect began to rebuild the city's infrastructure, investing in the very neighborhoods he once only viewed as tactical territory. He remained a man of steel, but his steel was now used to support the bridges I was building. We proved that the people the world underestimates are often the ones holding the keys to its salvation. Looking back at your own life, what is one invisible strength you've used to overcome a major obstacle? Share your triumph in the comments. This community is here to celebrate you. As the sun set over the Han River on our first anniversary, Teo and I stood on the same balcony where he had first given me the ring. The city below was a sea of lights, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. I felt like I owned it. Director Song was long gone, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones by the elite who now scrambled to get on my foundation's guest list. I turned to my husband, the man who had seen me when I was a ghost, and he pulled me close, his heartbeat a steady rhythm against my own. "You were never a waitress, Zuri," he whispered into my hair. "You were always a queen. I just had to wait for the world to catch up." Thank you for following this journey of revenge and redemption. Subscribe now to ensure you never miss the next story of power and love. The end.